The night my son gifted me a brand new phone, I thought it was just a thoughtful gesture. But hours later, the screen lit up on its own with a chilling message. Don't trust the one living beside you. When I turned to confront him, his face changed, and the words he whispered made me realize my life was no longer safe inside my own home. Before we start the story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Margaret, and I was 60 years old when this happened. I had lived most of my life in the same quiet house at the edge of town. After my husband passed away, the walls felt empty, and I filled my days with simple routines: gardening, sewing, and watching the world pass from my porch. My only son, Daniel, had moved back home not long ago after losing his job in the city. He was a good boy at heart, though I could see how the years had made him restless and burdened. One evening, as I set the table for dinner, Daniel placed a small white box in front of me. "It's for you, Mom," he said with a smile that looked both proud and nervous. Inside was a brand new phone, far fancier than anything I had ever used. "You deserve something modern," he added. I remember feeling touched, though a little uneasy. Daniel didn't have steady income, and the phone seemed expensive. Still, I hugged him tightly, telling myself it was his way of giving me comfort after the lonely years I had endured. That night, when the house grew quiet and Daniel had gone to his room, I placed the phone on the nightstand. I turned off the lamp and tried to sleep, but my mind kept wandering back to the glowing screen. At around midnight, the phone lit up on its own. I leaned forward, thinking it was just some ordinary notification. Instead, my eyes fell on a message that made my skin crawl. "Don't trust the one living beside you." My chest tightened. I read the words again, certain it had to be some kind of mistake. But the message remained, staring back at me in sharp white letters. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. Who could have sent this? What did it mean? I stepped out into the dim hallway, the floor creaking softly beneath my feet. That was when I noticed Daniel already standing near his doorway, as though he had been waiting. The shadows stretched across his face, but I could see his jaw tighten when he realized what I was holding. I whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Daniel, what does this mean?" I raised the phone so he could see the message. His eyes widened, and for a moment his lips pressed into a thin line. Then, in a voice so low it seemed more like a warning than an explanation, he said, "Mom, you weren't supposed to see that." The silence that followed Daniel's words was heavier than anything I had ever felt in that house. My heart pounded in my chest as if it was trying to push me to run, yet my feet refused to move. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale in the dim light. I wanted to believe this was some strange joke, maybe a technical glitch, anything but the truth, my instincts whispered. I took a step closer and asked again, my voice trembling, "Daniel, what does it mean? Who sent this message?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the living room, as though making sure someone else wasn't listening. That nervous flick of his eyes unsettled me even more. Finally, he lowered his voice and muttered, "You shouldn't have read it, Mom. It wasn't meant for you." His words were cold, but behind them I heard a flicker of fear. I clutched the phone tighter, feeling my stomach twist. "Was it you?" I asked. "Did you send this to scare me?" His shoulders stiffened, and then he shook his head quickly, almost too quickly. "No, Mom, it's not like that. You weren't supposed to know." I stepped back, my mind racing through possibilities. Had my son been hiding something from me? Who else could have access to my phone when I had only received it that very evening? Daniel reached out as if to take the phone from my hand, but I pulled it against my chest. For the first time in my life, I looked at my only child not with trust, but with suspicion. He saw the fear in my eyes, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "Please, Mom, just don't tell anyone about that message." That plea, so desperate and secretive, did not calm me. It only deepened the dread curling inside me. Something was terribly wrong, and I knew that night was only the beginning. Sleep never came to me after that moment. I lay in bed with the phone clutched in my hand, staring at the ceiling while the shadows of the night seemed to grow longer around me. The words kept circling in my head. Don't trust the one living beside you. They felt less like a warning and more like a blade pressed against my throat. I turned my head toward the wall separating my room from Daniel's and listened. I could hear him pacing back and forth, his footsteps sharp, restless, as if he was struggling with a decision he couldn't make. By morning, the house felt different. I brewed coffee in the kitchen, trying to force some normal rhythm back into my day. Daniel came in, his hair uncombed, his eyes bloodshot from a night without rest. He tried to act casual, talking about fixing the broken fence and picking up groceries, but I could feel the tension in his voice. When I slid the phone onto the table, he froze mid-sentence. His gaze locked on it and his hand trembled slightly before he forced it into his pocket. "Mom," he said quietly, "just forget about last night. It was nothing. Some glitch. You don't need to worry about it." But his tone betrayed him. He was asking me to bury it, to erase it from my memory. I sipped my coffee, pretending to nod along, but deep inside I knew this was not something I could let slip away. When he left for a short walk, I opened the phone again. There was no trace of the message, no notification, no record in the inbox. It was as if it had never existed. Yet I knew what I had read. My eyes hadn't lied. And that absence, that deliberate erasure, made it all worse. Someone had tried to cover their tracks. I sat there in the silence of the kitchen, staring at the blank screen, and for the first time since my husband's death, I felt utterly unsafe in my own home. For the rest of that day, I couldn't shake the weight pressing down on me. Every corner of the house I had once called safe now felt heavy with secrets. The curtains seemed too still, the walls too quiet. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but the way Daniel avoided my eyes whenever the phone was near told me my fears weren't just inventions of my mind. I decided to keep my distance and watch him carefully. While he worked in the yard, I pretended to be busy inside, though my eyes never left him through the kitchen window. He was restless, his movements jerky, his face pale under the afternoon sun. At one point, I saw him pull something small from his pocket, a folded paper. He read it quickly, glanced toward the house, then crumpled it tight before shoving it back into his jeans. The sight unsettled me even more. What could be so secret he couldn't let me see? Later in the evening, I tried to bring it up again. We sat at the table, dinner untouched between us. I spoke softly. "Daniel, if there's something going on, you need to tell me. You're all I have left, and I need to know I can trust you." His fork scraped against the plate, though he hadn't eaten a single bite. He looked up at me, and for the first time I noticed how tired and worn his face had become. His eyes, however, didn't hold exhaustion. They held something else. Fear, but also calculation. "Mom," he said, voice low and almost breaking, "sometimes it's safer not to know everything. Some things are better left alone." That sentence cut through me like ice. Safer not to know? Better left alone? These weren't words of comfort, they were warnings wrapped in riddles. I tried to press him further, but before I could speak, the phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart raced as I pulled it out, expecting another chilling message. But it was only a blank notification, no sender, no content, just a vibration and a screen lit up for 3 seconds before going dark again. Daniel noticed, his jaw tightened, and he quickly pushed back his chair. "I'm going to the store," he muttered. "Don't wait up if I'm late." He grabbed his jacket and left before I could ask where he was really going. The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat in the dim kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My hands clutched the phone, and my mind replayed everything. The hidden message, Daniel's strange words, the folded paper, the false casual tone. The The boy I had raised, the only piece of family I had left, now felt like a stranger living under my roof. And the more I thought about it, the more one truth became clear. Whatever was happening was much larger than a glitch on a phone. Someone wanted me blind, someone wanted me quiet, and Daniel was caught in the middle of it. That night, when the house was dark again, I lay awake listening for the sound of his return. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight. The phone on my nightstand lit up once more. This time there were no words, only a black screen with a faint symbol I didn't recognize. It vanished after a few seconds, leaving me staring into the darkness with my heart pounding. I barely slept that night. My body was in bed, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside, sounded like a warning. My husband used to say the house was alive, that old wood always whispered in the night. But now, those whispers felt like they carried secrets I wasn't meant to hear. When I finally drifted into a shallow sleep, I woke up again just before dawn, the pale light of morning slipping through the curtains. Daniel's door was still shut, though I didn't remember hearing him come home. I moved carefully through the house, my bare feet on the cold floorboards. The silence was too perfect, too controlled, and I couldn't stop myself from checking his room. The door creaked open slowly. His bed was unmade, the blanket tossed aside, but it was empty. My chest tightened. Where had he gone? His jacket was gone too, the same one he had worn when he left the night before. His shoes were missing from the mat by the door. It was as if he had left in a hurry and never returned. I tried to calm myself, telling myself he might have gone to stay at a friend's place or simply decided to walk off his thoughts. But then my eyes caught something on the desk by his bed, a notebook. It was half hidden under a pile of loose papers, and when I picked it up, I realized it was heavier than I expected. The first few pages were filled with messy notes, half sentences that didn't make sense, scribbled lists of dates, numbers, and names I didn't recognize. Some lines were scratched out so forcefully the paper had nearly torn. One page in particular froze me. It had just a single line written across the middle. "She can't find out too soon." My stomach dropped. I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the words until they blurred in front of me. Who was she? Was it me? Was my son writing about me? The thought was unbearable, but I couldn't ignore it. As I flipped further through the notebook, I found a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. It was a photocopy of something official, a legal-looking document. I opened it carefully and my heart almost stopped. It was a draft of a guardianship request. My name was on it, marked as the subject. The handwriting in the Fati'i margins, unmistakably Daniel's, included notes like, "Signatures needed," and "Present this at the right time." My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the paper. My own son had been preparing to take away my rights. My mind ran wild. Was he planning to declare me unfit, put me somewhere else? Was that what the phone message had been warning me about? Don't trust the one living beside you. The words looped endlessly in my head until I felt like they were carved into me. I quickly stuffed the notebook and the paper back where I found them, terrified that if he knew I had seen them, I might push him into whatever he was planning even faster. My pulse wouldn't settle, no matter how I tried to steady my breathing. I went back to the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at the clock. Each tick of the second hand was louder than the last. Around noon, the front door opened. Daniel finally returned, carrying a bag of groceries as though nothing unusual had happened. His hair was damp, like he had showered somewhere else. He set the bag on the counter and smiled faintly. "Morning, Mom," he said casually, but I noticed he didn't meet my eyes. I tried to act normal. I asked where he had been, but he brushed it off with a vague answer. "I stayed over at a friend's place," he said. "I needed to clear my head." He started unpacking the groceries, humming faintly under his breath, but every movement felt staged, every word carefully chosen. I sat there, nodding as though I believed him. Inside, though, my thoughts were racing faster than they ever had before. My son was hiding something dark, something dangerous. And if the notebook and that strange message were connected, then I was standing on the edge of something I didn't yet understand. One thing was clear. My life was no longer my own. I was being watched, planned for, and possibly betrayed by the very person I had trusted most in this world, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. That afternoon, the house felt like a trap. Every window, every closed door seemed to hold its breath. I moved through the rooms, slowly, quietly, as though the house itself might be listening. Daniel busied himself in the kitchen, tidying up the groceries, whistling a tune that was just off-key enough to sound strange. I sat at the table, my coffee growing cold, watching him like a stranger. This was my son, the boy I had raised with bedtime stories and scraped knees, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. And yet the man in front of me felt unfamiliar, as though someone had put on his skin. I kept thinking about that notebook hidden under his papers. The words, "She can't find out too soon," were burned into my mind. I could still see the guardianship form, my own name printed neatly at the top, my life reduced to a case file. It made my stomach knot. I wanted to confront him, demand answers, but something in his eyes warned me to wait. The way he moved around the kitchen, so controlled, so deliberate, told me this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. He was planning something, and I wasn't ready to show my hand. The phone lay on the table between us, its screen dark. I kept glancing at it, wondering if it would light up again, wondering if whoever had sent that message would reach out once more. The waiting was unbearable. I needed to know more, but I also needed to act like I didn't. "You've been quiet today," Daniel said, looking at me briefly. His tone was soft, but there was an edge hidden in it. "Are you feeling all right?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. Didn't sleep much last night." My voice sounded steady enough, though my heart was hammering. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me for a second too long, studying me, measuring me, as if he could tell I was hiding something too. After lunch, he retreated to his room, shutting the door. I waited until I heard the faint click of his computer starting up, then I slipped out the back door into the garden. The cool air helped steady me. I needed to think. The garden had always been my refuge, a place of peace, but now even it felt like a cage. I crouched by the flower bed staring at the soil until my neighbor and oldest friend, Helen, poked her head over the fence. "Margaret?" she called softly. "You look pale. Are you feeling okay?" I hesitated before answering. Helen had been there for me through the hardest years of my life. If anyone could sense something was wrong, it was her. "I'm fine," I said quickly, but my voice cracked on the word. She frowned and leaned a little closer. "I heard shouting late last night," she whispered. "Is everything all right with Daniel?" There it was, the first outside confirmation that something had been off. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. He's just stressed. You know how things have been for him. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. "If you need anything," she said, "or if you ever feel uneasy, just knock on my door, day or night." Her eyes were steady, kind, but curious too. When I went back inside, Daniel's door was open again. He was sitting at his desk, scribbling something on a piece of paper. He looked up as I entered the hallway and quickly turned the paper face down. "Going somewhere, Mom?" he asked. His voice was light, but his eyes were sharp. I shook my head and moved past his door. My hands trembled as I reached my own room. I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of my bed. The phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping for another message, some kind of guide, some clue to help me. But the screen stayed black. And yet, I felt watched, not just by Daniel, but by something larger, something I couldn't see. My instincts screamed at me that I had to be careful, that I had to find proof before anything happened, because if my son was planning to take my freedom from me, or worse, I couldn't afford to be one step behind. I stared at the silent phone and whispered to myself, "Whoever you are, send another message, please." But the screen stayed dark, and the house stayed quiet except for the sound of Daniel's pen scratching somewhere behind the wall. It was then, sitting in my own bedroom in broad daylight, that the strangest thought crept into my head. What if Daniel wasn't the one I needed to fear? What if someone else was moving us both like pieces on a board, and I was only just now waking up to it? The day dragged on with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Every time I moved through the house, I felt like someone was following just a step behind, breathing on my neck. The sun crawled across the living room floor, casting long bars of light through the blinds. By late afternoon, the air was so still it almost rang in my ears. Daniel had gone out again without telling me where he was going. He left his room door closed but unlocked, and that small act tempted me like nothing else. I stood in the hallway staring at it for a long time, before finally pushing it open. The room smelled faintly of cold coffee and something metallic, like coins. Papers were scattered on the desk, but the notebook I had found before was gone. The only thing left was his laptop, its screen dark but the little power light glowing like an eye. I didn't dare touch it. On the dresser, there were 3 envelopes stacked neatly, each with handwriting on the front. The top one read, "Medical Evaluation, Draft." My breath caught in my throat. The second said, "House Title Transfer." The third, "Power of Attorney, Final Version." My name was on all 3. My fingers trembled as I picked one up and unfolded it. It was a form, neatly typed, claiming I was no longer capable of making safe financial decisions and requesting a court date to assign a legal guardian. Daniel. My heart began to pound so loudly I thought the sound might give me away. I carefully put everything back, making sure it looked untouched. My head was spinning. My own son was planning to strip me of everything, my house, my choices, my independence. But how? Why? Was it for money? Debt? Something else entirely? The message on the phone rang in my mind again. Don't trust the one living beside you. Had someone sent it to protect me? If so, why had it come from my new phone, the one Daniel himself had given me? I returned to the kitchen and sat at the table, trying to calm myself. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily. I had raised Daniel alone after his father died. I had given him everything I could, gone without so he wouldn't have to. Now here I was, at 60 years old, realizing I might be living with a stranger who had my blood but not my heart. At dusk, the door opened quietly and Daniel stepped inside. His hair was damp again, his shirt changed, his eyes darting nervously around the room before landing on me. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're up late again," he said softly, as if we were sharing some secret. I forced a small laugh. Couldn't sleep. The house feels too quiet lately. My voice was calm, but my pulse thundered. He poured himself a glass of water, his movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. "You shouldn't worry so much," he said. "Everything's going to be fine soon." Those words chilled me. Fine soon. Not fine now, not you're safe, but fine soon, like something was about to happen that would change everything. I watched him drink the water, his eyes flicking to the phone on the table as if checking to see if I had read another message. When he went to his room again, I stayed at the table and stared at the phone until my vision blurred. I had to do something. I had to be sure. But who could I turn to? Helen, my neighbor, had offered help. But how could I explain this without sounding like I'd lost my mind? If I told the police without proof, they'd think it was just another older woman being paranoid about her adult child. I needed evidence, real, undeniable evidence. Something to prove that what Daniel was planning was more than just a bad idea scribbled in a notebook. Something to show I wasn't imagining it. That night, lying awake in the dark, my thoughts twisted tighter and tighter. What if I was running out of time? What if this wasn't just about paperwork and signatures? What if Daniel's plan went beyond taking my house and my freedom? What if it was something worse? I turned over in bed, staring at the faint glow of the phone on my nightstand. The screen was dark but felt alive, like it was waiting. I whispered into the stillness, If someone's out there, send me another message. And then, just as the words left my lips, the phone vibrated. A single new notification appeared. No sender listed, only words. Check the attic before he does. My blood ran cold. My hands went numb as I read the message. Check the attic before he does. The words pulsed on the screen for only a few seconds before disappearing into nothingness, leaving me staring at my reflection in the black glass. My heart thudded so hard it echoed in my ears. I sat up straight, glancing at the door to make sure it was still closed. The old attic. I hadn't been up there in years. It was where my husband had stored boxes of records and tools, old photos and odds and ends we never used anymore. Daniel had never been interested in it, or at least I had thought he hadn't. The house felt like a live wire as I moved slowly through the hallway. Daniel's room door was shut again. I pressed my ear to it and heard the low murmur of his voice. He was on the phone with someone. The tone was sharp, clipped, like he was negotiating. Yes, she doesn't know yet. Just give me a few more days. His voice dipped lower, and I couldn't make out the rest. A chill climbed my spine. He wasn't just planning this alone. There was someone else. I retreated silently to the end of the hall where the pull string to the attic hatch dangled. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over it. The house groaned softly the same way it always had when the wind blew, but tonight it felt like a warning. I pulled the string. The hatch opened with a faint creak and a dusty ladder dropped down. The smell of old wood and insulation drifted out. My heart hammered as I climbed, each rung squeaking under my weight. The attic was dark except for a small strip of light leaking through the vent. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the beam. Everything looked as it always had. Boxes stacked high, old furniture covered with sheets, a trunk my husband had once used. But there was something new. In the far corner, a space had been cleared. The boxes that had been there were shoved aside, and in their place was a small metal case, locked but not shut completely. I crawled across the creaking boards and opened it. Inside were papers neatly arranged in folders, all bearing my name. I flipped through them with trembling fingers. Bank statements with large withdrawals I hadn't made, insurance policies I didn't remember signing, copies of my signature that didn't look quite right. There were also printed emails between Daniel and someone named R. Fletcher about accelerating the process and ensuring a clean transfer. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a guardianship plan. This was an entire operation to take everything from me. At the bottom of the case was something that nearly made me drop it. A small brown bottle with a faded pharmacy label, no name visible. It was half full of a clear liquid. Next to it, a typed note. Dosage in tea. Fast effect, minimal trace. My vision blurred. I pressed my palm over my mouth to keep from crying out. I stuffed a few of the papers into my sweater pocket, careful to leave the rest undisturbed, then crawled back to the ladder. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. As I descended quietly, I heard Daniel's door open. His footsteps creaked into the hallway. "Mom?" His voice was calm but searching. "What are you doing?" I froze under the attic hatch, one foot still on the ladder. I couldn't sleep," I called out, forcing my voice to sound steady. "I was just checking the heater." He walked closer. Even from below, I could sense his eyes on me, sharp and probing. "It's late," he said softly. "You should be in bed." "I'm fine," I murmured, climbing down the last rung and closing the hatch with a trembling hand. "Go on back to your room. I'll be right there." He didn't move for a moment. The silence stretched like a rope between us. Finally, he said, "All right. Good night, Mom." His footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut again. I stood in the hallway, gripping the papers in my pocket, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The message on the phone had been right. If I hadn't gone up there, I would never have found the truth. My son wasn't just preparing to take my freedom. He was preparing to take my life. And now I had proof. But I also knew one more thing. If he realized I had been in the attic, I might not have much time left. I crept back to my bedroom and closed the door softly, pressing my back against it as though that thin slab of wood could protect me. The papers in my pocket felt heavier than bricks. My fingers trembled as I laid them out on the bed one by one. Bank withdrawals, forged signatures, insurance forms, the typed note about the tea, my own son's handwriting, neat and careful in the margins, marking dates and steps like a checklist. I stared at the brown bottle for a long time before I realized I was holding my breath. My mind reeled backward through every evening tea Daniel had ever offered me since he moved back home. The nights I'd felt unusually drowsy, the strange, dizzy spells I'd brushed off as age. Had he been testing me all along, making sure the dose worked? The thought made my stomach churn. I gathered the papers and tucked them into a fabric bag under my pillow. I knew hiding them in a drawer wouldn't work. If Daniel had been in my accounts and my documents, he probably already searched my room. I would have to be clever. My husband's old toolbox in the shed came to mind. It had a false bottom he had once built to hide cash during hard years. I would move the evidence there at first light, but then came the question that clawed at me. Why? Why would my own son, the boy I had raised alone, the boy who once slept on my chest when he was sick, do this to me? Was it desperation? Debt? Someone else pulling the strings? That name, R. Fletcher, burned in my mind. The emails in the attic had been too formal for family business. Whoever this Fletcher was, they were the architect behind this plan, and Daniel was the pawn. Or maybe the willing partner. I hardly moved the rest of the night, sitting upright against my headboard, clutching the phone in one hand and the brown bottle in the other. My thoughts spiraled. If I called the police now, what would I even say? My adult son is poisoning me. Please come. They'd want proof. They'd want evidence. And until the test results came back, all I'd have were words on a paper and a bottle of liquid he could claim was anything. The house stayed dark and quiet except for faint movements from Daniel's room. I heard his floorboard creak around 2 a.m., a drawer opening, the soft thump of footsteps. I held my breath, not daring to move. Then silence again. At sunrise, I went into the garden with my coffee, trying to act normal. Helen was out watering her roses. She waved, and I managed to wave back. My hand shook so badly the coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. What if she went to Daniel? What if she thought I was imagining it? Daniel emerged around 8, fresh shirt, hair damp again. He smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Morning, Mom," he said. "You're up early." He set his mug on the table and went about making breakfast as if we were a normal family. I sat down across from him, forcing my expression to stay calm. "You were out late," I said lightly. "Where did you go?" "Just errands," he replied. "Meeting a friend." His eyes flicked to my phone on the table, then back to me. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I lied. "Just couldn't sleep." He smiled again, but the skin around his eyes didn't move. He slid a plate of toast toward me. "Eat, you'll feel better." I stared at the toast, wondering if even that was safe. My heart thudded as I picked up my phone under the table and opened the messaging app. No new messages. Whoever had been warning me had gone silent. I lifted my eyes and met Daniel's gaze. He was watching me intently like he was waiting for something. A slip, a sign, an answer. I smiled faintly, breaking the silence. "I think I'll go visit Helen later," I said. "That's nice," he replied, but his tone was flat. I pushed the toast away, my appetite gone. My mind was already working, planning my next step. The attic had given me the truth, but not the way out. If I moved too soon, Daniel would know I'd found everything. If I waited too long, I might never get another chance. I looked at my son, the only family I had left, and felt the strangest mix of grief and determination rise in my chest. The boy I raised was gone. The man across from me was something else. And if I wanted to survive, I would have to be smarter than both of them. him and whoever R. Fletcher really was. That day dragged like a weight tied to my ankles. Every tick of the clock in the living room sounded louder, sharper, as if it was counting down to something I couldn't see yet. Daniel moved about the house as though nothing was wrong. He fixed the loose curtain rod in the hallway, swept the porch, even laughed at a television commercial like we were just a regular mother and son. But I noticed every detail. How he always glanced at my cup before I drank, how he watched me when I walked into a room, how his voice softened in an almost rehearsed way whenever he spoke to me. I excused myself to the garden again, needing the open air, needing space from his eyes. I brought the fabric bag with the papers tucked under my sweater. The shed was old, its wooden planks weathered gray, but my husband's toolbox still sat in the corner where he'd left it years ago. My hands shook as I pulled it open, fingers fumbling at the false bottom. I slipped the documents, the bottle, and the copies of signatures into the hidden space, then closed it carefully. Only then did I feel like I could breathe. For now, at least, the proof was safe. When I turned, I nearly dropped to my knees. Daniel was standing in the doorway of the shed. His figure filled the frame, his arms crossed loosely. He tilted his head and smiled faintly. "What are you hiding, Mom?" he asked softly. My throat went dry. I forced a laugh, wiping my hands on my skirt. "Nothing. Just checking some old tools. Your father left them, you know." He stepped inside slowly, glancing at the toolbox. "Strange," he said. "You haven't been in here for years. Why today?" I kept my eyes on him, steady as I could manage. "I've been thinking of fixing the gate," I replied. "It doesn't close properly anymore." There was a pause. His gaze lingered on me, sharp and searching. Then he shrugged lightly and smiled again, though it didn't touch his eyes. "You should let me handle that," he said. "Don't want you hurting yourself." He walked out first, holding the shed door open for me as if he were still the dutiful son. Back in the house, I locked myself in my room and pressed my back against the door. My heart raced, pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Had he seen me put the papers away? Did he know? Or was he just testing me, waiting to see if I would slip? As evening fell, I sat at the kitchen table pretending to read an old recipe book while Daniel cooked dinner. The smell of stew filled the air, rich and heavy. He set the bowl in front of me with that same calm smile. "Eat," he said. "You'll feel stronger." I stared at the spoon, my stomach twisting. Every bite felt like a risk, but refusing would raise suspicion. So I lifted it slowly, barely touching it to my lips, before setting it back down. Daniel sat across from me, eating with ease, never looking away from my face. The silence between us grew until it pressed against the walls. Finally, I spoke. "Daniel, do you remember when your father used to tell you stories about the old house? How he said every board remembered what we did here?" He looked at me blankly, then smirked. "Dad said a lot of things." The way he said it, so dismissive, so cold, sent a chill through me. That wasn't the boy I raised. That wasn't the man I thought had come back home. I realized then that whoever had sent those messages on the phone might have been the only one in this entire house who wanted me alive. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, I sat in the dark living room staring at the silent phone. I whispered into the silence, "What do I do next? Please tell me what to do." My voice shook, not from age, but from fear. As if the phone had been listening, it lit up in my lap. A new message appeared. No number, no sender, just words. "He's not working alone. Watch the window at midnight." I felt the blood drain from my face. Midnight was only 2 hours away, and if the message was right, Daniel wasn't the only threat under this roof. The moment that message blinked and disappeared, the entire house felt like it tilted. He's not working alone. Watch the window at midnight. Those words rolled through my head over and over. My throat felt tight. I looked at the clock on the kitchen wall, just past 10. 2 hours. 2 hours until whatever was about to happen. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as though even breathing might give me away. I stayed still for a long time, my fingers gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. The phone lay dark and silent again, like nothing had ever happened, but the words had already carved themselves into my mind. If Daniel wasn't working alone, then who else was in this? Was someone coming to the house? Was someone already here? I stood and moved slowly through the house, forcing my steps to be light. The living room lights were dim. Daniel had already gone upstairs to his room, or at least I thought he had. His door was closed, no sound from behind it. I locked the front door, then the back. Then I checked the windows, one by one. Everything looked normal. The soft orange glow of the street lamps outside, Helen's porch light glowing faintly across the yard, the trees shifting slightly in the breeze. Nothing unusual, but the normality felt staged, too quiet, like a theater set before a performance. Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my lap. My mind drifted backward again, unwillingly to when Daniel was a boy. I had raised him alone after his father died. He used to bring me little treasures from the yard. Acorns, feathers, once a broken watch he'd found. He used to slip notes under my door, telling me I was the best mom in the world. And now here I was, hiding evidence against him, fearing that the person I loved most was plotting to destroy me. My stomach twisted. How had it come to this? I pulled the papers from the shed out of my sweater pocket again. I'd moved them there when Daniel wasn't looking earlier. I spread them out on the bed. Bank withdrawals I hadn't made. Insurance policies naming Daniel as sole beneficiary. That brown bottle with its faded label. And the typed note, dosage in tea, fast effect, minimal trace. The handwriting in the margins of some pages wasn't Daniel's. It was different, neater, sharper. That had to be R. Fletcher. If someone else was in this house tonight, I needed to see them before they saw me. I needed to be invisible. I shoved the papers back into the bag and stuffed it under the mattress, then turned off my lamp and sat in the dark. The phone screen's faint glow was the only light in the room. The clock crawled. 10:30, 10:45, 11. My ears picked up every sound. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint squeak of a floorboard somewhere, the whisper of wind against the siding. Each sound seemed magnified, suspicious. My palms were slick with sweat. At 1:45, I heard Daniel's door creak open upstairs. I held my breath. Soft footsteps crossed the hallway. Down the stairs. They moved slowly, carefully, like someone who didn't want to be heard. Then silence. I crept to the window by my bed, pulling the curtain back just an inch. The yard looked empty under the pale wash of the streetlight. Helen's house was dark now. The trees swayed. Nothing. I almost let out the breath I'd been holding. And then I saw it. A figure at the edge of the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing, standing near the back fence just beyond the light's reach. They weren't moving, just watching the house. My skin went cold. The phone vibrated in my hand, almost making me drop it. Another message flashed, "Do not go outside." I stayed crouched by the window, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would echo through the glass. The figure shifted slightly, and for a split second the light caught their face. It was a man I didn't recognize. Sharp jaw, dark hair cut close, eyes hidden in shadow. He looked toward the house, then down at something glowing faintly in his hands. A phone or small device. Inside the house, a floorboard creaked below. My stomach dropped. Daniel wasn't upstairs anymore. He was downstairs, with the man outside. I moved away from the window, pressing my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The phone vibrated again. "Stay hidden. They think you're asleep." I crouched in the dark corner of my room, the phone clutched against my chest, my heartbeat thunderous. Below, faint voices rose, one Daniel's, one deeper. I strained to listen. "She's asleep. Daniel whispered. "It's almost ready." "Good," the deeper voice said. "We can't afford another delay. We do it tonight." My lungs seized. Do it tonight. The words echoed in my skull. They weren't waiting for a court petition anymore. They weren't waiting for signatures. Whatever was planned, it was happening now. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Their footsteps moved toward the kitchen. A cabinet opened, then shut. The clink of glass, water running, and then the unmistakable sound of a bottle being uncapped. My stomach lurched violently. I knew exactly what bottle that was. I needed to think, fast. If they brought me something to drink, if they found me awake, everything would unravel. I glanced toward the window again. The man outside was now closer, standing by the porch steps. He held something small and silver. A key? A knife? I couldn't tell. The phone vibrated again, a third time. "You have evidence. Hide it now. Make noise. Pretend you're awake but calm." I swallowed hard. Whoever was sending these messages had been right about the attic, about the window. If I wanted to survive, I had to trust them. I slipped the bag of papers and the brown bottle under the loose floorboard near my bed, a hiding place I hadn't used in years. I pulled it back into place, flattening it quietly. Then I turned on my bedside lamp and grabbed an old book from the nightstand, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, coming up. I opened the book and stared at the page, though the words swam uselessly before my eyes. The doorknob turned slightly, then a soft knock. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was low, almost gentle. "You're still awake?" I cleared my throat and tried to sound casual. Couldn't sleep, just reading. A pause. "I made you some tea," he said. "Thought it might help." The smell of something faint and sweet drifted under the door. My heart thundered. "That's kind of you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just leave it outside. I'll drink it in a minute." Another pause, then the sound of a mug being set on the floor. "All right," he said softly. "Good night, Mom." Footsteps retreated down the hall. The house went silent again, but the air felt alive with danger. I sat perfectly still, staring at the door. I could almost see the mug out there, steam curling in the dim hallway. I didn't move. The clock on the wall ticked toward 12:30. The man outside was gone now, or at least I couldn't see him from my window anymore. I gripped the phone tight, waiting, hoping for another message. My entire body trembled. If they were planning to do it tonight, I had to act before morning, because morning might never come for me. And just as that thought filled my head, the phone vibrated again. A fourth time. "Get out now. Back door. Quiet. Bring nothing." I stared at the words. My pulse roared. I had a bag of evidence hidden under my floorboard, a son plotting against me, a stranger outside, and a single anonymous message telling me to leave. If I left, I might live. But if I left, everything that proved what they were doing would stay behind, and then no one would believe me. I sat frozen, the phone glowing in my hand, the mug of tea cooling in the hallway, and the night pressing against the windows like a living thing. This house had always been my home. Now it felt like a stage built for my end. I had minutes to decide, stay and risk everything, or run and risk everything. Either way, my life was no longer in my hands. The phone's glow dimmed to black again, but the words burned in my head. "Get out now. Back door. Quiet. Bring nothing." My fingers tightened around the device until my knuckles ached. I sat there on the bed, motionless as though moving too quickly might draw their attention. Downstairs, somewhere below me, I could hear faint movements. The scrape of a chair, a cupboard closing softly, the sound of low voices. Daniel's voice and the deeper one again. My stomach clenched. The message had been right about everything so far. It had warned me about the attic. It had told me to watch the window. And now it was telling me to leave. But how could I walk out of my own home with nothing? The evidence I'd hidden under the floorboard, the forged documents, the brown bottle, was my only chance at proving I wasn't losing my mind. If I left it behind, they could destroy it. Then, even if I survived, no one would ever believe me. I stood up slowly, my knees shaking. The old floorboards creaked beneath me like they were scolding me for moving. I bent down and pried up the loose plank with trembling fingers, heart hammering as though each thud echoed through the house. The bag was still there, tucked safely in the hollow space. I pulled it out and held it against my chest. The weight of it felt like a lifeline. Another faint sound drifted up from below, the front door opening and closing softly. I froze, listening. Footsteps outside on the porch, a low murmur of voices, then silence again. Whoever had been out there before was back. I shoved the plank back into place and clutched the bag tight. My mind raced. The message had said, "Bring nothing." But if I left without this, I'd be defenseless. I decided I couldn't obey it completely. I would take the evidence with me. I turned off my lamp and crept to the bedroom door. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The clock on my nightstand showed 12:42. My mouth was dry, my hands slick with sweat. I eased the door open an inch at a time, praying it wouldn't squeak. The hallway was dim, lit only by a weak glow from the streetlight filtering through the landing window. The mug of tea Daniel had left for me sat on the floor like a trap, steam curling faintly in the cold air. I stepped around it, holding my breath. Every step down the stairs felt like crossing a minefield. The wood groaned softly under my weight. I paused at the bottom, peering into the kitchen. No one. The counters were clean, the sink empty. The back door was ahead of me, just beyond the kitchen table. My heart leapt with a mix of hope and terror. Then I heard it. A faint click from the front hall, like a lock turning. I ducked into the shadow of the pantry, pressing my back against the shelves. My breath came in shallow bursts. A moment later, two figures moved past the doorway. Daniel and the man from outside. They didn't see me. They were whispering, their voices sharp but low. "She's been quiet," the deeper voice said. "You're sure she drank it?" "I left it outside her room," Daniel murmured. "She always drinks it." "Good, then we'll move her tonight. No mistakes this time. The van's ready." My stomach turned to ice. The van. Move her. No mistakes. They weren't talking about paperwork anymore. "We'll use the side door," the man continued. "Less chance of neighbors seeing." "She won't resist," Daniel said quietly. "She's been tired. It'll be easy." I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The phone vibrated in my pocket again, so faintly I almost didn't feel it. I slid it out slowly. Another message. "Window in laundry room. Unlocked. Go now." I peeked out from behind the pantry door. The laundry room was on the other side of the kitchen, near the back door. If I moved now, I might make it. But Daniel and the man were only a few feet away in the hallway. I could see the edge of Daniel's sleeve, the man's shadow on the wall. I waited until their voices dipped lower, until they were turned slightly away. Then I slipped out of the pantry and padded silently across the kitchen, the bag clutched tight in one hand. My bare feet made no sound on the tile. The laundry room door was ajar. I slid inside and closed it softly behind me. The window was just above the dryer, old and stiff but unlocked like the message had said. I pushed it up slowly, wincing at the faint squeal of the frame. Cold night air rushed in, smelling of wet earth and distant rain. The yard lay silent outside, the trees black shapes against the sky. I hoisted the bag through first, then climbed up, my arms trembling from the effort. My knees scraped against the frame, but I bit back a cry. I landed on the damp grass outside with a soft thud, crouching low. My heart hammered. I was out. The phone buzzed again. "Run to Helen's. Don't look back." I looked back anyway. Through the kitchen window, I saw Daniel step into the laundry room, his eyes scanning the space. His face twisted when he saw the open window. He shouted something I couldn't make out. I ran. The grass was slick under my feet, the night air cutting against my face. My chest burned, my legs felt weak, but I kept moving. Behind me, the back door slammed open. Daniel's voice carried through the night, calling my name, sharp and furious. Helen's porch light glowed ahead like a beacon. I stumbled up the steps and pounded on her door. "Helen!" I gasped. "Helen, open up!" The door flew open. Helen stood there in her robe, eyes wide. "Margaret, what on earth?" "Close it," I hissed. "Lock it." She did. I collapsed against the wall inside, clutching the bag to my chest, my lungs heaving. Helen stared at me, shocked. "What's going on?" she whispered. I couldn't answer yet. My heart was still hammering too hard. Through the window, I saw movement in the yard. 2 figures, searching with flashlights, sweeping the beam across the grass. Daniel and the man. "They're coming," I whispered hoarsely. "Call the police." Helen's face went pale. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and started dialing. I pressed my back against the wall and clutched the bag tighter. The evidence was safe. I was safe. For now. But the night wasn't over. Not yet. Outside, the flashlights danced across the yard, closer and closer. Helen's voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes, emergency. 2 men outside my house. My neighbor's with me. She's in danger." I sank to the floor, my head in my hands. The phone in my pocket buzzed one last time. I pulled it out. The message said only, "Hold on. Help is coming." I raised my eyes to the window. Daniel stood at the edge of Helen's yard, the flashlight beam catching his face. He was no longer pretending, no longer smiling. His expression was cold, hard, unrecognizable. He raised his hand and pointed straight at me through the glass. And in that moment I understood. Whatever boy I had raised was gone. This man outside was a stranger wearing my son's face, and tonight he had come to finish what he started. Helen locked all 3 deadbolts on the door and pulled the curtains closed. We sat there together in the dim light of her kitchen, while the sound of sirens, faint but growing louder, drifted through the night. The wail of the sirens started faint, just a thin thread of sound in the distance, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. My hands were shaking too hard to steady the phone, the glow of the screen trembling in my vision. Helen gripped her own phone so tightly her knuckles were white. She had the dispatcher on the line, speaking quickly but in a hushed tone, glancing out the window every few seconds like she expected one of them to break the glass at any moment. Outside, Daniel and the tall man moved like shadows across the yard. They had killed their flashlights now, but I could still see them by the weak glow of the street lamp. They were scanning, searching, their heads moving side to side. The taller man pointed toward the back of Helen's house, saying something I couldn't hear. Daniel's reply was short, sharp. His body language was all tension now, no more pretending. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor of Helen's kitchen, the bag of evidence clutched against my chest. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. The brown bottle inside the bag pressed against my ribs. I thought of all the nights I'd felt strangely tired after tea, of how Daniel had smiled and told me to rest. The thought made me want to be sick. Helen knelt beside me, whispering, "They're sending police. They said stay put." Her voice shook, but there was steel under it. She'd been my neighbor for 30 years. She'd seen me at my best and my worst. Now she was looking at me like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. "Margaret," she said softly, "what's happening? Why is Daniel—" "Don't say his name," I hissed before I could stop myself. My voice was sharper than I'd intended, but it spilled out of me like a reflex. I lowered my voice again. "Please, just trust me. He's not the same." Helen swallowed hard, eyes flicking toward the window again. "He's your son," she whispered. "I've known him since he was a boy. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." My voice cracked on the words, but I meant them. "He's not alone. There's someone helping him. Look." I gestured toward the curtain. Helen hesitated, then peeked. The man with Daniel was closer now, his shape clearer. Even from this distance, I could see the outline of something strapped under his jacket. A case, a tool, or worse. He whispered something in Daniel's ear and pointed toward Helen's back gate. "They're trying to flank the house," Helen breathed, pulling the curtain shut again. I reached for her arm. "Lock the basement door, all the windows. They'll try to get in." She moved quickly, checking each window latch and sliding every deadbolt she could find. I heard the faint click of the basement door locking, the creak of the back door handle being tested from outside almost at the same time. The sound froze my blood. Someone was already trying it. Helen returned, her face pale but determined. "Police said they're 2 minutes out," she whispered. 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like a lifetime. I sat there, clutching the bag, trying to think. If they got inside before the police arrived, we'd be trapped. The bag held everything. The bottle, the documents, the emails. If they took it from me now, they could wipe it all away, claim I was paranoid, sick, delusional. All of this would vanish like smoke, and I would vanish with it. A soft tap on the window made Helen jump. She backed away, clutching a kitchen knife now. Through the thin gap in the curtain, I saw Daniel's face. He was right at the glass, smiling faintly. It was the same smile he'd given me when he handed me the phone, the smile that used to belong to my son. But his eyes were wrong, cold, hungry. "Mom," he called softly, his voice muffled through the glass. "Come outside. We need to talk." Helen's grip tightened on the knife. I shook my head. "Don't answer him," I whispered. "Mom," Daniel said again, "please. You're confused. You're scaring Helen. Just come outside and everything will be fine." Helen shot me a look, half fear, half disbelief. I could see the question in her eyes. What if he's right? What if you're wrong? I reached into the bag and pulled out one of the forged documents, shoving it toward her. "Read this," I hissed. "Look at the signatures." She glanced down, her lips moving silently as she read. Her face went white. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Margaret, this is—" "I told you," I said, my voice trembling. "He's not my son anymore." Outside, Daniel's smile faltered. He knocked once more, harder this time. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting from coaxing to sharp. "Open the door." Then from the yard, the taller man's voice. "Forget it. We don't have time." Daniel turned his head, hissed something back. The man gestured toward the side of the house. I heard the back gate creak. Helen lunged to the kitchen window and peeked out. "They're moving," she whispered. The sirens were louder now, closer, echoing down the street. But so were the sounds from outside, running footsteps, the squeak of the gate hinge, the crunch of gravel. "They're going to try the side door," I whispered. Helen grabbed her phone again. "They're almost here," she muttered into the line. "Hurry." Then came the sound of metal on metal, the unmistakable clink of a lock being forced. Helen backed up until her shoulders hit the counter, clutching the knife like a lifeline. I stood, too, pressing my back to the wall, the bag clutched to my chest. My legs felt like water, but some part of me had gone cold and clear. If they broke in before the police arrived, we'd have one chance to act. I thought of the brown bottle, the note about the dosage. I thought of every night Daniel had handed me tea. I thought of the attic, the papers, the man outside pointing at me like I was already his. And I knew I wasn't going quietly. The back door rattled hard. Once, twice. Then a dull thud as if a shoulder had slammed against it. Helen gasped. I stepped forward, putting my hand over hers on the knife, steadying it. "If they get in," I whispered, "we go for the front door, run to the street, don't stop, understand?" She nodded quickly, eyes wide. The thud came again, a crack. The sound of wood splintering, footsteps running up the porch. The men were on both sides now. The sirens were so close I could hear the echo of them bouncing off the houses. Then, a flash of blue light through the curtain, headlights, voices shouting, "Police!" The pounding at the back door stopped. Shouts outside. The slam of car doors. Commands barked. "Hands up! Step away from the house!" Helen let out a sob of relief, sagging against the counter. I stayed frozen, clutching the bag to my chest, unable to breathe. Through the small gap in the curtain, I saw Daniel on the porch, his hands half raised, his face pale. The tall man stood beside him, his expression unreadable. Flashlights lit them up like a stage. Officers moved in, weapons drawn. "Margaret!" one called through the door. "Are you inside?" I found my voice. "Yes!" I shouted. "We're here." "Stay put," the officer said. "We've got them." Helen sank to the floor, her knife clattering against the tile. I stayed standing, trembling so hard the bag shook in my hands. Outside, officers pushed Daniel and the tall man to their knees. One of them was still shouting something about mistakes, about misunderstandings. But his voice was drowned by the clatter of handcuffs. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window, my breath fogging it. The boy I'd raised was kneeling outside under a flashlight beam, and I couldn't tell if the tears on my face were from fear or grief. Helen reached up and touched my arm gently. "It's over," she whispered. But as I stared at Daniel's face, his eyes still locked on mine even as the officers pulled him to his feet, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. He hadn't looked surprised. He hadn't looked caught. He had looked like a man who still had one more move left. And in the pit of my stomach I felt it. Whatever had started in my house that night wasn't going to end neatly on Helen's porch. This was only the middle of the story. The flashing blue and red lights painted the walls of Helen's kitchen in trembling colors. My ears still rang with the bark of police orders and the clink of handcuffs, but inside the house, the silence was heavy. Helen sat on the floor against the cabinets, her face pale, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. I stood at the window, frozen, staring at the scene outside as though it weren't real. Daniel and the tall man were pinned to the ground by officers. The taller one shouted something about rights, about calling his lawyer. But Daniel stayed eerily calm. He didn't fight. He didn't yell. His eyes just stayed on the window, on me, steady and cold. Even with his hands cuffed behind his back, he seemed less like someone caught and more like someone waiting. It made the hairs on my neck rise. 2 officers came to Helen's door and knocked. "Police, ma'am," one called. "It's safe now. Please open." Helen rose shakily, glancing at me. I nodded. She unlocked the bolts one by one. The officers stepped in, their uniforms bringing a strange mix of relief and dread. The taller one spoke gently. "Are you both all right?" "Yes," Helen whispered, though her voice quavered. "Yes, we're all right." I clutched the bag tighter to my chest, my pulse still hammering. "They were trying to break in," I said hoarsely. "My son and that man, they were trying to take me." The officer's eyes softened. "We've got them in custody now. We'll need your statement, both of you." I nodded quickly. My knees felt weak, but adrenaline kept me upright. "I have proof," I said, my voice low, desperate. "In here." I lifted the bag slightly. He frowned. "Proof?" "Documents," I whispered. "Bank statements, forged papers, a bottle." I glanced at Helen, who nodded firmly. "She's telling the truth," she said. "I saw it." The officer nodded once. "We'll take care of it. Right now, let's get you somewhere safe." But as he spoke, another voice cut through the night. Daniel's voice, calm, carrying across the yard as if he wasn't the one pinned under police lights. "Mom!" he called. His voice was smooth, steady, far too steady for someone in handcuffs. "Don't do this. You don't understand." I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. The sound of his voice, so familiar and so wrong at the same time, sliced through me. I turned to the window, and there he was, standing now between 2 officers who held him by the arms. His face was pale, but his expression was composed, almost gentle. "You're confused," he said. "They've been feeding you lies. That phone, It's not what you think. They're using you." One of the officers yanked his arm, but he kept speaking. "Don't hand them the bag, Mom. If you do, you'll regret it." My grip on the bag tightened until my fingers hurt. His words slithered into my head like smoke. "They're using you." I shook my head, backing away from the window. "Don't listen," Helen whispered urgently. "He's trying to twist you." But the seed was already there. My son's voice, calm, persuasive, the same voice that used to coax me into forgiving his childhood mistakes, the same voice that once told me he loved me, and now that voice was telling me not to trust the very people who had just saved me. The taller man shouted something too, but the officers shoved him into a cruiser, cutting him off. Daniel didn't resist when they pushed him toward another car, but even as the door shut behind him, his eyes stayed on me. That look, steady, unwavering, followed me even after the car pulled away. When the lights and sirens faded, the quiet was suffocating. The officers inside asked me questions, took notes, looked over the papers I shakily pulled from the bag. They handled the brown bottle carefully, slipping it into an evidence bag. One of them promised it would go straight to a lab, but none of their words stuck. My mind replayed Daniel's voice over and over. "They're using you. Don't hand them the bag." By 3 a.m, Helen's kitchen looked like a war zone had passed through it. Papers were scattered, the curtains half torn from where she had yanked them back. She brewed us both tea with shaking hands, though neither of us drank it. I sat with the empty cup in front of me, staring at it as though poison might appear out of nowhere. "Margaret," Helen said gently, "you need to rest. They've got him. It's over." But I couldn't rest. I couldn't even sit still. "It's not over," I whispered. "He wasn't afraid. Did you see his face? He wasn't afraid at all." Helen reached across the table and took my hand. "He's your son. It's hard to accept, I know, but you can't keep doubting yourself. You've been strong. You've survived tonight. That's what matters." I tried to nod, but her words slid off me like water. My son had looked me in the eye while the police cuffed him, and he hadn't looked like a man caught. He had looked like a man with another plan. By morning, the police had taken me to the station to give a full statement. Helen came with me. I laid everything out. The phone messages, the attic, the notebook, the bottle, the men outside. The officer taking notes nodded, occasionally asking questions. But I could see the hesitation in his eyes when I mentioned the phone. An anonymous sender. Messages that appeared and vanished without a trace. It sounded impossible, like paranoia. Still, they promised to investigate. They promised I'd be safe. But when they dropped me back at Helen's house, a strange emptiness settled in my chest. Safe. The word felt meaningless. Helen made breakfast, but I couldn't eat. I sat at her kitchen table, the morning light streaming through the curtains, staring out at my own house across the yard. The windows looked calm, ordinary, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. The house had betrayed me. My son had betrayed me. And somewhere, R. Fletcher was still out there, waiting for the next move. When Helen went to shower, I picked up my phone. My hands shook as I unlocked it. The message history was empty again. Every warning, every instruction gone as if they had never existed. But when I pressed my finger to the screen, the phone vibrated once more. A new message appeared. Just 4 words. "This isn't finished yet." My throat closed, my vision blurred. I dropped the phone onto the table as though it had burned me. In that moment, I realized Daniel had been right about one thing. I didn't understand. Not yet. And if the phone was telling the truth, last night was only the beginning. I sat in Helen's bright, safe kitchen, with sunlight pouring over the table, and felt the same terror I had felt in the attic, in the hallway, staring at that mug of tea. Because safety, I knew now, was only an illusion, and the fight for my life was far from over. The sun rose on Helen's street like it did every morning, pouring warm light over the neatly trimmed lawns, the cracked sidewalks, and the old trees that had stood there for decades. Birds sang as though nothing had happened, as if the night before had been just another stretch of ordinary darkness. To anyone passing by, Helen's house and mine across the yard looked perfectly calm, perfectly normal. But inside me, nothing was normal anymore. I sat by Helen's window, staring out at my home, clutching a cup of untouched tea in my hands. The officers had promised me safety, had promised they would keep Daniel and the man locked away. But promises are only words. Words can be twisted, papers can be forged, locks can be broken, and I knew the truth in my bones. This story was not over. The bag of evidence was still beside me on the floor, heavier than ever. The forged papers, the guardianship drafts, the emails, the brown bottle, they had almost been my end, but now they were the only reason anyone believed me. Without them, I'd be nothing but a frightened old woman with wild accusations against her own son. I thought about that constantly. How close I had been to losing not just my home, but my voice, my truth, my very self. Helen came into the room quietly and touched my shoulder. "You should try to sleep," she said softly. Her eyes were tired too. She hadn't rested either. "They've got him. You're safe here." Safe. That word again. I forced a small smile for her sake, but inside I felt the truth pressing harder and harder. Safety is fragile. Safety is only as strong as the walls around you, and I had seen those walls crack. My son, the boy I had raised, had stood outside Helen's window with eyes that no longer belonged to him. He had smiled as though he was still mine, but the truth was, he had been someone else entirely. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the words he'd spoken as the police took him. "Don't hand them the bag, Mom. If you do, you'll regret it." At first I thought it was manipulation, just another trick. But now, in the quiet light of morning, those words felt heavier, like a shadow that refused to leave. Regret what? What did he know that I didn't? The phone was on the table beside me. Its screen was black, but it might as well have been a living thing. The warnings it had given me had been the reason I survived. Don't trust the one living beside you. Check the attic before he does. Watch the window at midnight. Get out now. Every single one had been true, and yet I didn't know who was sending them or why. They had saved me, yes. But what did they want from me? As the minutes stretched into hours, I realized the worst part wasn't Daniel being gone. It wasn't even the thought of the man who'd helped him, or the mysterious R. Fletcher whose name appeared in those emails. The worst part was knowing that my life had been built on trust, and now that trust had been poisoned forever. I had trusted my son more than anyone in the world, and that trust had almost killed me. What would I do now, when I couldn't trust even the people closest to me? I closed my eyes and thought about my husband. He had been gone for years, but I imagined his voice, calm and steady like it always had been. He used to say, "The house remembers. It carries everything we do inside its walls." If that was true, then my house no longer remembered love and laughter. It remembered betrayal, danger, and secrets hidden in the attic. The police would keep investigating. They would pull apart Daniel's finances, trace his messages, test the liquid in that bottle. They would ask me to testify, to explain in detail how my own son had tried to erase me. And I would do it. I would sit there, tell them every word, every movement, every warning. I would not let this vanish into silence. But in the quiet of Helen's kitchen, I understood something else too. This wasn't just my story. This was a warning not only for me, but for anyone who believes trust is unshakable. Evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it smiles with the mouth of your child. I thought of that moment in the attic when I opened the metal case and saw the papers with my name on them. My whole life, reduced to a plan on someone else's desk. I thought of the bottle, small and ordinary, but deadly enough to end me quietly. And I thought of the messages, glowing against the dark, guiding me step by step through a nightmare. Maybe one day I would learn who had sent them. Maybe one day I would discover who R. Fletcher really was. But until then, I carried the truth with me. I had survived because I listened, because I stayed alert, because I refused to let the silence swallow me. And maybe that was the lesson buried deep in this horror. Sometimes survival depends not on trusting, but on doubting. I turned to Helen, who was watching me carefully, and I squeezed her hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for believing me." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Always." I looked back at my phone, still dark and silent, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt resolve. Whoever had been watching me, whoever had sent those warnings, had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. And that, dear listener, is why I share this with you. Not because it's easy to say, not because it doesn't hurt, but because silence almost killed me. If you ever feel something is wrong, if the people closest to you act in ways that make your instincts scream, listen to that voice inside. It might be the only thing keeping you alive. I don't know what will happen next. The investigation is far from over, and my son's face still haunts me every time I close my eyes. But I know one thing. I am still here. I survived. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep fighting to make sure the truth is known. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from today? Share it in the comments below because I love knowing who's out there listening. If this story made your heart race, please give it a like. It helps more people find these stories. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Every story I tell has a lesson, and I want you here with me when the next one comes. Thank you for staying with me through this. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, sometimes the biggest danger is not outside your home. It's the one living right beside you.